Oklahoma State and Mike Gundy almost parted ways, but they decided to stay together. I'm glad this worked out because, frankly, I don't think it would have been good for either side to break up. This is kind of like the anti-UCF Scott Frost take here, where I'm like, I don't know that that's great for either party to be getting back together. I don't think it's great for either party, Oklahoma State or Mike Gundy, to have split at this point. But he is coming back. There was a lot of drama surrounding this on Friday. Like Friday night, it sounded like Oklahoma State came to Mike Gundy with a restructured contract and some stipulations there, and he had to decide whether or not he was going to agree to it, but he did. He'll be back for a 21st season as part of the new contract. This is according to The Athletic. As a part of the new contract, Gundy is expected to be paid considerably less than he previously had agreed to, and the buyout structure of the deal is expected to change. His salary had been $7.75 million. He was the highest paid coach in the Big 12. That was 17th in the country. But his buyout was roughly $25 million if he was going to be fired. So that is a part of this. When I say I don't know that it would have been best for both sides to break up, a part of this is if Oklahoma State's having to foot the bill for $25 million just to fire Gundy and then have to hire somebody new, and then you're going into revenue sharing. That's a lot of finances for anybody to take on. And by the way, I don't think they're alone in that. Like Florida, I think that probably played a role in what happened there with Billy Napier and keeping him around. Gundy not only struggled this year, obviously we know he went 3-9, but remember the comments that he had that made people mad. He said basically the team's critics, the haters, were people that can't pay their own bills and are not taking care of their own job. That rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. That was reported in the story. Don't just take my word for it. That was reported in the story by The Athletic. But I'll just say this, man. Like if you're Mike Gundy, I wouldn't want to go out like that. Like a 3-9 season, the legacy you have at Oklahoma State, what you've done, I would not want to go out on a 3-9 season. He's competitive enough. He's not going to want to do that. Even if there's not another 10-plus win season in there, which every time you count Gundy out, it seems like there is. We did this 2 years ago after a 7-6 season. Almost, all these guys left in the transfer portal that offseason. Spencer Sanders left to go be a backup at Ole Miss. Trace Ford goes to Oklahoma. So many key defections from the transfer portal. Everybody assumed Gundy was done. He came back and won 10 games and went to the Big 12 championship. So when you leave him for dead, typically he's got another one in him. But even if it's not to the high levels that he's been before, I would think for his sake, like, you want to leave on a better note than 3-9. Even if you go back, I was like looking back through Gundy history. He had that stretch where he goes 7 wins, 8 wins, 8 wins, and you're like, all right, like are things kind of leveling off here? Well, then he was right before 2021, and then Gundy puts together the 12-win season where they come up just inches short of a Big 12 championship and they win the Fiesta Bowl. So second 12-win season for Gundy at Oklahoma State after that point when everybody declared him dead, or at least thought maybe this is getting a little dull. In 2014, he went 7-6 in the middle of like his real heyday at Oklahoma State, and then he had 3 straight 10-win seasons. So, and on top of this, I would just say for Gundy's sake and the school's sake, I think it's this whole confrontation is going to be nothing but a good thing because change is needed to happen. Like you can't go 3-9 and think, yeah, well, just run it back, status quo, things are okay. Not at that program the way it's been going. Clearly there were issues there. Something had been going on. So for Gundy to get a push here, if that's what it was going to take, even if it made him mad, if that's what it was going to take to get a push here, I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing. The defense was a disaster. I mean, injuries or not, I know Colin Oliver gets hurt and like the defense needs to be better than just the worst unit in the Big 12. If you're Oklahoma State, you should have enough talent there. So moving on at defensive coordinator makes sense. The offense had quarterback issues. Maybe it was a mistake bringing Alan Bowman back. But, even beyond that, like they couldn't run the ball with Ollie Gordon. Like, the guy was the Doak Walker winner last year, and you can't run the ball with him at all this year. Things were wrong with the offense. There's got to be a fall guy. It was Casey Dunn who was the offensive coordinator, like I understand it. Make coordinator changes, take a little bit less money. I mean, that'll help Oklahoma State. Maybe that doesn't help morale so much with Gundy, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. And then the other thing, obviously, that's been talked about a lot is pushing him to embrace NIL more, which he's not always been the most like gung-ho guy NIL wise. So it's a good thing for both parties if you can get Gundy on board to be like, hey, dude, just do the NIL thing. Let the kids make the money. You may not love it. Even if you say publicly now that you're fine with it, you may not love it, but this is the world we live in. And if you're going to be our coach where we want to win at the highest level, you got to do it. That's going to be good for both parties. And I do think there's an element here for Oklahoma State. Fans won't want to hear this at all, but there is a little bit of like this, be careful what you wish for, if you're really wanting Gundy out. Now, if Gundy this really is it, and he's not going to adjust and, game passed him by sort of thing, then okay. And maybe that would be your argument. But man, that's a guy that's just won a ton of games and been about as consistent as anybody in college football over the last 20 years. You better be convinced that there's somebody out there that's going to be a great hire that can bring in a great staff if you are going to get rid of him, because he's just proven over the course of time to be a really valuable high floor commodity that also can give you the high ceiling seasons as well. So the high ceiling seasons are not coming as consistently as they once did, but they are still in him. And yes, like you'll have to move on at some point. I feel like there are some similarities here to K-State and Bill Snyder. And eventually, yeah, you were going to have to move on and prove somebody else can win there. Like in the modern era for Oklahoma State, prove somebody else can win there. But it just felt a little too soon for me to want to just hit eject and bail on Mike Gundy there. I had to have Oklahoma State fans, just sake of transparency, and tell you where I'm coming from on this. I've had to had some of these conversations with the good folks on our Discord for the Three Mod podcast. People getting pretty negative on K-State football after the losing 3 of 4 to end the season and worried about offseason and transfers and all that. And sky's falling, and Kleiman needs to be out if he's not going to do this. And I have to kind of say, guys, like, I know none of you want to hear it. No one ever wants to hear the guy who's going to be like, hey, but the floor is high. I was like, hey, the floor is pretty high. And like, this is K-State. You're really rolling the dice if you're bringing somebody else in. And like, people seem to think Colin Klein is the next head coach. I think there would be a good chance of that if he is still available at that point, not as a head coach. That's rolling the dice, man, when you know that Chris Kleiman's a guy who you can basically pencil him in for 8 wins every year, unless there's a global pandemic. You can pencil him in for 8 wins. I had to do some of that talking here. I think there's some of that at play here for Oklahoma State too. So I would have been very leery of doing that. Now, some of the discussion was, which this is kind of the fascinating part of it. Like they were talking about, firing Gundy with cause because of those comments. I assume because of those comments, why they would be firing him with cause, why you could get away with that. And Gundy, that's, I guess, some of how you leverage Gundy into taking less money. So Oklahoma State wasn't messing around about like, hey, we need changes here. Like stuff's got to get better and be different if you're going to stick around. I would say well played for Oklahoma State. I think this is the best scenario. You don't have to pay crazy buyout money, keep him around, give him another shot, and yet make some changes that'll help him, pull him along to modernize him. See what that pulls out of him, see what that does. I see you guys asking about West Virginia. I don't have any like crazy inside info other than it looked like the 2 guys that a lot of the search is centering around right now are Andy Kotelnicki, who is the offensive coordinator at Penn State, former OC, obviously at Kansas, and Rich Rod. Seems like there's a lot of smoke around Rich Rod as well. So beyond that, I do not have any crazy inside information for you on the West Virginia coaching search.